Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Jennifer Withrow. I am Deputy Chief Curator at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection. We have a wonderful hour and a bit ahead for you. And so we're so glad that you're here to spend a bit of your Sunday afternoon with us. I'll begin with a land acknowledgement. The McMichael Canadian Art Collection is located on the original lands of the Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat people. It is uniquely situated along the Carrying Place Trail, which historically provided an integral connection for Indigenous people between Ontario's lakeshore and the Lake Simcoe Georgian Bay region. As an institution, the McMichael recognizes the importance of acknowledging the original territories of the Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and other Indigenous nations. Before we begin our program, I'll say three short things. Firstly, this talk is being recorded. So if right now you're thinking about a friend or family member who would love to have been here with us, please either send them the link to join us now or look for the recording of this talk on our YouTube channel. It'll pop up in a couple of days. Secondly, we reserve time at the end of this talk for questions. So if you have a question for one of our panelists or a general question, you can press the Q&A button. Your question will just come into the sort of background to me, and I'm going to take them all together and see what we can bring to our panelists at the end of the program. And thirdly, I would like to thank the heroes who helped make Early Days, the book that has occasioned this talk, a reality for us. This book has been the most ambitious publication that this team has ever undertaken, and it would not have been possible without the heroic support that we received from the Appleton Initiative at the McMichael, the Brett Cameron Indigenous Art Curatorial Fund, Christine and Andrew W. Dunn, Rand and Linda Lomas, and Andrew and Valerie Pringle. Thank you so much to them. We love to do talks free to make them available to audiences across Canada, but we can't do those without the support of Canadian art lovers. If you are moved to join our circle of supporters, there are many ways that you can do that. Visit us. We're open Tuesday to Sunday, and we always have exciting things on. Buy our books, first among them perhaps Early Days. We're going to get into that later over the course of the next hour. And visit us, buy our book, and join to be a member. We have a wonderful membership program with lots of benefits to get early access to all of our great offerings and discounts on membership and in the shop. So with that, I would like to pass the pass the baton to Sarah Milroy. She is our Executive Director and Chief Curator. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you so much. It feels more like a torch, actually. Thank you so much, Jen. My happy task is to introduce Bonnie Devine, who many of you know who are on this call with us tonight. Bonnie is someone that I got to know quite recently, I think about 6 or 7 years ago, when I had just come to the McMichael, and I was thinking a lot about our site. On this bluff that I came to understand overlooks this very ancient, very significant Carrying Place Trail, which traces its way alongside the Humber between the Georgian Bay region and Lake Ontario. And what it initially started as being perhaps a display of Wendat cultural belongings that were held by the TRCA, the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, quickly morphed through my conversations with Bonnie into her taking that torch and running with it and creating her wonderful mural project, Water to Water, Away Through the Trees, which is her way of sort of investigating and honoring that Carrying Place Trail, and also the Wendat people who were the original inhabitants of the region that we're in. And Bonnie initiated extraordinary and meaningful diplomacy with the Wendat people who came and gathered at McMichael with her and with others. And we just got to know each other better and better. And around the time that this was happening, we were putting up an exhibition called Early Days, which was an exhibition that I curated about our Indigenous collection, which is, of course, a third of the collection of the McMichael is made by Indigenous people, which is something that is not widely known. Now we're part of the reason for doing this big project, not just the exhibition, but also the book, was to make that presence once again really front of mind for everyone, and to open our relations with cultural stakeholders across the country. So we started talking about this, and we started talking about the exhibition and working together on a few of the extended labels that dealt with Anishinaabe belongings and works of art by Norval Morrisseau and others. And we just worked really well together. And so I had this idea that this exhibition, which was so beautiful, but very few people saw because of COVID, needed to become a book. And so we started talking about that. And my colleague, John Gagan, our associate curator of collections and research, joined our circle. And in the end, the entire curatorial committee was all dancing with Bonnie in making this book what it has turned out to be. And Bonnie was instrumental in deciding who should be writing what. She was instrumental in reaching out and having those first conversations with writers about what kind of writing they were free to do, whatever they wanted to do. And what was interesting, we got a range of very personal writing through to very scholarly writing in that different academic and more conventional mode, and everything in between. So I think the freedom that Bonnie was able to communicate is borne out in the texture of the book, which I find so lush and warm and human. So I'm going to read Bonnie's introduction, because she has done so many things so brilliantly that I live in terror of leaving something out. So here I go. Bonnie Devine is an installation artist, educator, and writer. She is an off-reserve member of the Ganabicing Anishinaabe Servant River First Nation on the north shore of Lake Huron, and her work explores issues of land, treaty, and history. Though she holds degrees from both the Ontario College of Art and Design University and York University, Devine's most enduring learning came from her grandparents, who were trappers on the Canadian Shield in Northern Ontario. Her recent exhibitions include Battle for the Woodlands at the Art Gallery of Ontario in 2014, La Rabida, Soul of Conquest, an Anishinaabe Encounter, 2018 to 22, curated and toured by the Art Gallery of Peterborough, The Gift, 2022 at the University of Michigan Museum of Art, and, as I mentioned, From Water to Water, Away Through the Trees, 2022 to 23 at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection. Devine received a Lieutenant Governor's Ontario Heritage Award, an OCAD-U's Award for Distinguished Research and Creative Activity in 2019, and a Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts in 2021. So thank you all for listening so carefully, and take it away, Bonnie. We have been so lucky to have your leadership on this, and I feel personally so lucky to have been able to get to know you so well over these years. And God only knows what we're going to get up to next, but maybe we can start speculating about that at the end of this talk today.
Gee whiz, Sarah, thank you very, very much for that lovely introduction. I feel quite humbled. What I really want to talk about is the wonderful panel that we have with us today. We're so truly honored to have Barry Ace. I'm gonna read everyone's biography. I hope you don't mind. But Barry Ace is a citizen of Chiging First Nation on Manitoulin Island. For more than 30 years, Barry Ace has been active in the milieu of visual and performing arts. In the early 1990s, he was lecturer at the University of Sudbury in the Indigenous Studies program, before taking on the position of chief curator at the Indigenous Art Centre in Odawa of the Crown Indigenous Relations Department, the Government of Canada, and Northern Affairs Canada. He served in that capacity from 1994 to 2000. These are seminal years in the development of Indigenous literary history and art history, I think. So thank you, Barry, for that service. Barry is a co-founder and served as the inaugural director of the Indigenous Curatorial Collective, another groundbreaking organization. It was a nonprofit, it is a nonprofit art service organization in support of the Indigenous critical and curatorial communities. And thank you, Barry, for your service in that area as well. A multidisciplinary artist, Barry has exhibited his work since the 1990s in numerous solo and group exhibitions. Currently, his work is included in several international touring exhibitions, including Early Days, Indigenous Art from the McMichael, which is opening, by the way, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the end of this week. Indigenous Histories at the Museum of Art in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and at Code Bergen in Norway, and in the upcoming Future Imaginaries, Indigenous Art, Fashion, and Technology at the Autry Museum of the American West in Los Angeles, California, opening in the fall of 2024. Welcome, Barry. Dana Claxton is a critically acclaimed, award-winning artist working in film, video, photography, single and multi-channel video installation, performance art, and curatorial practice. Her practice investigates indigeneity, beauty, the body, the social, political, and the spiritual. Her work has been shown internationally and is held in major public and private collections in Canada and around the world. She is a professor and the head of the art department at the University of British Columbia and is a member of the Wood Mountain Lakota, who are located in southwestern Saskatchewan. Dana comments, "I am grateful to the sun and my Sundance teachings. Mani ki wakan, water is sacred. Mani wichkoni, water is life." Thank you, Dana, for joining us today. Emily Henderson. Emily Laurent Henderson is a Greenlandic and settler arts writer and currently works as Associate Curator, newly inaugurated, I have to say, Associate Curator of Indigenous Art and Culture at the McMichael Museum. Emily was formerly a curatorial assistant for Indigenous art at the Art Gallery of Ontario, as well as an editor at Inuit Art Quarterly. She frequently writes on topics related to Inuit self-determination within the Inuit art market and the broader contemporary art landscape. Her writing has appeared in Azure, Sea Magazine, Inuit Art Quarterly, Inuktitut Magazine, and Studio Magazine. Welcome, Emily. And Lynn Hill. Lynn, it's amazing to have you join us today. Lynn Hill served as curator of Native art at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection from 1993 to 1998, the first Indigenous curator at the institution. And, you know, until Emily was hired a few months ago, the last. There is a long gap of service between you and Emily, Lynn, and I'm just so interested in hearing your thoughts about the evolution of curatorial practice in Canada, particularly at the McMichael. And I know, or I imagine, Emily has tons of questions to ask you, maybe after this panel is over, about your service time and what you learned. During Lynn's time at the McMichael, she led a dynamic exhibition program, and that's putting it mildly. She advocated for the acquisition of many trailblazing works of contemporary Indigenous art at the McMichael. She is currently decompressing, though, from her curatorial endeavors and lives happily in Vancouver with her pack of Shih Tzus. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you.
Sarah Milroy, of course, is our executive director and chief curator at the McMichael, and also the curator of the exhibition Early Days and co-editor of the accompanying book, in addition to many, many other projects ongoing and past at the McMichael. Sarah will offer her comments to our discussion as she feels inspired to do so. Collectively, our panel represents decades of experience and labor in Indigenous arts and culture, working with and in some of Canada's finest public institutions, museums, universities, and galleries. They offer us a unique opportunity to talk about the museum and its evolving relationship with the art and peoples of Indigenous Canada. My questions, I have 3 of them. My questions will be directed to the entire panel, with each participant having about 3 minutes each to answer. So by doing this, we're hoping to stay within an hour. We might go over, but we're going to try and stay within an hour. So my first question is directed again to all of us. Can you tell us about the best exhibition of Indigenous art or visual culture you've ever seen? It can be a show you were in or that you curated. It can be an exhibition that you saw or that you wrote about. Please tell us what was so good about it, what worked especially well, and what it taught you about museum practice with respect to Indigenous art and artists, historical belongings, and their makers. I'm going to ask Barry to answer this first, if I can. Sorry, Barry.
Are you going alphabetical? I've had it all my life.
I'm gonna
Exactly.
go alphabetical for this first one,
Yeah,
and then I'll go in reverse order for the next one. Is that okay?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Bonnie. Thank you very much for the kind words and the introduction. And this is a really great question. But you know, being around so long in Indigenous art history, this is a real tough one for me to actually pick out one exhibition. But there's several exhibitions that tied for first place in terms of my my interest. They all have similar attributes. So just quickly, I'm going to name them, and then I'm going to focus on one, and I'll flesh that particular one out. Land Spirit Power, 1992, NGC, curated by Robert Houle, Diana Nemiroff, Charlotte Townsend Galt, highlighted by groundbreaking works by Faye Heavyshield and Truman Lowe. Notably, Robert Houle's essay, The Spiritual Legacy of the Ancient Ones. This is 2024, and we're still unpacking that essay. The drawings and paintings of Daphne Ojig, curated by Bonnie Devine in 2007, Art Gallery of Sudbury and National Gallery of Canada. Beautifully curated touring exhibition that was complemented by Witness, a symposium on Woodland School of Painters, and that was captured in a legacy publication. Paris Ojibwa, Robert Houle, 2010, Canadian Cultural Centre, Paris, France. A truly profound and moving experience for me, being invited by Robert as a dancer and a writer. And this exhibition remains light years ahead of its time. Raise a Flag, works by from the Aboriginal Art Collection, which was dear to me, 2000 to 2015, curated by Ryan Rice in 2017 for On-Site Gallery at OCAD. The best collection of contemporary Canadian Indigenous art in the world, squirreled away by the Canadian government, finally exposed and brought into light after decades of languishing in silence and obscurity. Facing the Monumental, Rebecca Belmore, 2018, Robert Houle read his beautiful 2021, curated by the brilliant Wanda Nanabush for the Art Gallery of Ontario. Incredibly moving and powerful retrospective exhibitions curated with rigor, care, love, passion, and a very deep understanding of the artist's work and their contributions to art history. So that being said, I want to now focus on another of my favorite exhibitions, and one that is very close to my heart. And yes, I'm probably biased. Anishinaabe Art and Power, 2017, curated by Dr. Alan Corbier, Saul Williams, and Arnie Brownstone for the Royal Ontario Museum. And what was good about it? Well, for me, it was led and curated by two well-respected Anishinaabe culture-based curator and visual artists, historians, cultural keeper, linguists, and a settler Canadian museum curator. It was a culturally sensitive approach to curation that made really profound segues, between historical and contemporary works that not only revealed the impact of colonization, but it also highlighted on the ongoing cultural revitalization, reparation, and cultural continuity. For example, animating seemingly insignificant mundane objects like a very obscure fur trade era mortar and pestle used to squeeze the oil out of beaver scent glands and used as as a binder in making of perfume, juxtaposed against a contemporary work by Frank Shabagaget entitled Castor Castorium, in which he made 16 lucite, small, colorful perfume bottles molded from a cast of the beaver's scent gland and illuminated on a lightbox pedestal. And without this intervention, this museum object would have remained silent. But together, these two spoke to colonization, consumerism, the fur trade, economic seduction, and more. And the inclusion of the artist's first voice in this exhibition through artist statements, the inclusion and use of Anishinaabe Moen throughout the exhibition, all led to the success, I think, and the I don't know, the depth of the presentation of these works. And I truly believe that without this integral Anishinaabe perspective and culture-based knowledge Alan Saul brought to the curatorial team, the exhibition would not have had the depth nor distinct Anishinaabe aesthetic and sensibility that together truly embodied Anishinaabe art and power.
Wow. Thank you so much, Barry. I'm going to ask the same question. I'm not going to repeat the question because I don't want to bite into your time, but I'm going to ask the same question. What was your favorite Indigenous exhibition, Dana?
Thank you, and thank you for that, Barry. And many of the exhibitions align with favorite exhibitions. I'm actually am going to be self-indulged and talk about an exhibition that I'm working on right now. And it's a exhibition I'm co-curating at the Haudenosaunee Museum in Whistler with Curtis Collins. And the working title at the moment is Women Carvers of the Northwest Coast. And, you know, I've been here on unceded Salish territory for 40 years. I've been, you know, I'm urban Indian, and but I go back home to South Dakota as well as, well, to Saskatchewan, where I'm from, often, but yet I've chosen to stay here and to do the kind of cultural work through curation and art making that I've been doing. And but, you know, very conscientious of, you know, whose territory I'm on and what are the realities here in this territory. And so it's been, you know, a real, of course, honor, as well as it's significant that to curate this exhibition as a non-West Coast woman, non-West Coast artist. I'm curating it with a Caucasian man. And but I think that's all okay. And so the 15 women that we're curating into the show, 3 are past, but the rest are living artists, and they're, you know, all trusting. And it's, you know, it sort of a year into the research, and then the second year into the research, realizing, you know, holy smokes, like this is a huge huge responsibility. And, you know, what really, you know, am, you know, I have to take that responsibility very important, you know, very, you know, importantly, as well as, you know, sacredly as well. And so, you know, we've been looking at both public and private collections, and looking at some of the works that are stored. I can't remember what your exact words were, Barry, but how some of those public, you know, those public collections in Ottawa, the work never gets out.
Squirreled away.
Yeah, yes. And so, you know, I'm the amount of work that say, for instance, at Frida Deasing in the collection in Ottawa is massive. And so that we can show maybe 20, 30 of her works is significant. I think we're only going to show about 20. But and then Ellen Neal Lesser, we found less of her work in public collections. And then looking at all the carvers from New Channel territory in by Tofino through to Haida Gwaii. And so all those West Coast territories, and you know, some of the women have never met nor know about each other's practice. And so
Wow.
I'm very grateful to, yeah, so and you know, realize that the profoundness of that, and that we need to bring them all together. And, you know, we have to have I'm trying to look for a better word than round table. But, you know, to have a round table and to bring all these women to Whistler, which is the plan of the opening of the weekend. And so everybody's so excited about that, of course. And so, but through looking at collections, both public and private collections, and then the work that the artists are making, and not, you know, as I'm of course a non-anthropologist, I'm a non-art historian, but, you know, I think I know Indigenous art pretty well. and I think I know contemporary Indigenous art really well. And there's been those, ongoing debates about carving. I think they're done now, but is it art or is it craft? I think that's done, but it's still kind of, there's hauntings of it. There's ghosts of that debate. But I feel confident. In fact, I was writing on an essay deadline, of course. So I was writing part of the essay this morning, but how to articulate and thinking of that, really that foundational essay of the ancients that you mentioned of Robert Hoole's. I reread that all the time, and I've assigned it many times, and it's almost it makes me emotional thinking about it, but it's profound what he says, and he doesn't, and it's not a long essay. It's not this overextended, overwinded historical, not to diss art historians, because I love art historians, but just what he brings to light in that essay. Yeah, I've read it many times and assigned it many times, but just thinking about here on the Northwest Coast, looking at these ancient practices and the line, and then and then bringing it into the contemporary moments as it was a bit daunting a few months ago thinking about that, but also thinking about the responsibility of what curators do. And there's a huge responsibility that we that we have and are doing. And and Lynn, thinking about you at the McMichael, I mean, those were early days. There was hardly any Indigenous curators anywhere in the early 90s. And the work that you were doing, I was hearing your bio, I was reminiscing of that important work. And but yeah, so just thinking about, of course, the derivative or the roots of curatorship in terms of the curative, and how it's a really big responsibility, I believe, curating, and especially myself right now, curating work from a different cultural group than my own is exciting, but there's a huge responsibility.
Thank you, Dana. I wonder if I could just ask you when that exhibition is opening.
Exactly what I wanted to ask. Yeah, let's get it on our calendars.
It's this coming November. That's I'm on the deadline for the essay. And I've got to, of course, look at my calendar. But it's this November, and then I think there's the plan to maybe tour parts of it. We're also, of course, making a major publication that is. There's been a series of different exhibitions that have. It's not the first exhibition of Indigenous women carvers, but it's going to be sort of one of the most significant. Because we have the need. We have the means to make a publication, to maybe tour it, to those kind of things.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dana.
Make sure to reach out to us about that, because I had gotten wind of this show from Curtis, but it sounds really, really important. And as you say, these things, particularly, I mean, having worked a bit with art by settler women and their legacies, is that, there have been shows of this sort, but they've always been tiny and under-resourced. And, it's just extraordinary what happens when you can put the appropriate resources behind something and really blast the word out there. So
yeah,
this is very exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'd like to now let Emily Henderson in on this discussion and tell us, Emily, what is your favorite exhibition and why?
I'm also going to be biased on not an exhibition I was involved in, but exhibition Inuit art. So I was very, 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 very fortunate to catch Inua at the new Kamayuk in Winnipeg in 2022. I really thought I was going to miss it because of COVID, and I wasn't going to be able to make it out to Winnipeg. I wasn't going to be able to see that show. And that show was actually curated by 4 co-curators. So it's Heather Gugliorte, Krista Uliuk-Sawadsky, Kapusiak, and Asayak. And that show, I think, is significant because it really surveyed the landscape as it is. It's a snapshot of a moment, I think, in an Inuit art history and an Inuit art trajectory. And because each each of the 4 curators. And I think having this collaborative approach to curatorial practice is really important, and one that I is echoed in Towards Home, which is on display at the Daniels building at U of T, if anyone has a chance to see that. Was each curator came from one of the land claims regions in Nunavut, so Nunavut, Nunatsiavut, Nunavik, and the Inuvialuit settlement region. And they also brought a breadth of different experiences. So Krista Uliaksawadi, her background's in anthropology, which is also my background. Heather Guliarte, you know, art historian. Asteniak and Kablusiak are artists, multimedia artists. Asteniak's also associated with film. And so being able to see not only all those different disciplinary perspectives, but then also the perspective of each of the land claim regions and different types of media and work that was in the show made for, I think, a really, really comprehensive look at what is happening in Inuit art, which is all very exciting right now. Being able to see that show was incredible. It was also, it was an Inuit team the whole way through. Jocelyn Piernan was the curator of Inuit art at that time. The book was designed by Mark Bennett, who's an Inuk graphic designer and book designer. Nicole Luke is an Inuk architect, was the exhibition designer on that. So being able to see what it was like to bring all this Inuit brilliance together into that show as a collaborative effort and not just under a single curator or a single way of doing things was really amazing. And then I was also one of many, many, many contributors to the audio guide. So there was Inuit artists, writers, contributors from all across the country who got to contribute and comment on individual works in that show. And it felt like a real community effort, and it made you feel like you were a part of something bigger. And then I also mentioned, like, one of the best shows I've seen in really recent times is Towards Home. That's currently, it started at Canadian Centre for Architecture in Montreal and is now currently at Daniels and U of T. And I think I have this down. That is Takerlik Partridge, Jocelyn Piernan, Rafiko Ruiz, and I can't pronounce this name, it's a Sami name, Joar Nango. And it's about infrastructure and home and ideas of domesticity and design across Arctic communities. And I think that's another thing I love to think about too, not just art as art objects, but also design that we interact with and engage with in our everyday life. And again, that the 4 curators, the multiple perspectives, and then also what's really interesting about that show, and I can't speak to how it's been set up in other locations, but the way that you enter, there's the works of art, and then on adjacent wall, you can see a little bit of a breakdown in the artist's own words, as well as samples from the materials. And I'm very materially minded, and I love to see how the sausage is made. So being able to get that sort of structural breakdown and a little bit of contribution from the artist's own voice, I think is a really, really, really special experience. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Emily. This is fantastic. And this is an exhibition that's open right now that people can get to see. I love that. Thank you so much.
Closes in March.
Closes in March?
Yeah, March 23rd, I think.
Okie dokie. Thank you. Lynn, we now ask you the same question. What was or is your favorite ever Indigenous art exhibition, and why?
It wasn't necessarily the exhibition itself, but it was an installation in the exhibition. It was Gerald McMaster's installation of the 120 moccasins at the Museum of the American Indian in '94. And I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. It was a point of view of how these objects were used, were worn, and lived in. And I thought that was the most important thing, rather than looking at static items behind glass. I wasn't impressed with the way that, I guess, the security that they have to put around works of art so people don't touch them. But I thought that they could have had a better way of securing it. I don't know. But yeah, and then for him to further it on when he received his Governor General Award, including Barry's work erased in that installation with the cowboy boots. And I don't know, I just thought that was just, it touched me. And it's all about the point of view, how things are displayed, how you want people to see it, what do you want people to perceive, what do you want people to leave with after viewing it. I don't know, it's been a long time ago. Had to rack my brain
Lynn?
for that.
Lynn, can you describe for people who didn't have a chance to see that, what that exhibition looked like? How did he install it? And
Oh, okay, yeah.
how did you?
It was 120 pairs of moccasins, different types of moccasins from the collection of the Museum of the American Indian.
Mhm.
And he installed it in a spiral of shoes, similar to like a round dance. And the moccasins themselves, some were lifted up as if they were dancing themselves. I don't know, just created movement to it. You know, give people different perspective.
Yeah, see, now I just want to see images of these works, and
Try and find
get-
one for you, Bonnie.
yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to the second question. And this time, because we're maybe running already out of time, I'm going to probably jump in and kind of stop you when you're talking at the 3-minute mark, or at least give you a heads up. Okay, is that all right? I hope so. The second question I wanted to ask everyone, without necessarily naming names or institutions, could you tell us about your most difficult experience in a museum or a gallery, either as an Indigenous visitor looking at an exhibition, or as an Indigenous artist, curator, or historian working with a museum or institution? Tell us what was so bad about it and what could have been done better. And this time I'm going to start in the reverse order. So I'm going to ask Lynn to talk to us about this. Lynn?
Okay, one of my most difficult, I would say, as a curator and working with institutions, and I would say it probably was the last straw that broke the camel's back. But I'm not having support, internal support from the gallery for you as an individual. Like, it's pretty hard being the only Native person in a big institution when everybody thinks you're there to take their job. You're there to tell them that they're wrong and you're right, when that's not true. Again, it goes back to that point of view. You're just trying to get people to look at things differently. I'm not saying that the way you thought was wrong or the way that I think is right. It's just a different point of view. Trying to, and then not by not only the exhibition, like as a curator and curating an exhibition, the support of having people support you. Who's going to help you install it? I mean, I know I got spoiled at the McMichael, I'll tell you that right now. Because there were people there to help you install, people there to talk to you, people who wanted to do the change. They wanted this and they wanted a different way of looking at things. And then to go to another place where they're like, oh, no, we don't want you. We don't want this, sir. You're telling me it's all wrong. Why are you not including this artist? You know, what about this? What do you mean you want to put art right in the middle of the museum? You know, contemporary piece. People are going to get confused. It's like, no, it's the juxtaposition of the contemporary with the historical works. They're talking to one another. So yeah, that's the hardest part when you don't have the internal support. You know, that's what I would say.
Lynn, you were
Thank you
doing
very
that.
much, Lynn.
You were doing that so early too. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Now that's kind of commonplace to do that, but you know,
Exactly.
a long
Yeah.
time ago.
Yeah.
Hampton was quite the
heartbreaking.
day.
Yeah. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Emily, could you tell us what was your worst experience and how come, and what could, what could
Yeah.
have been done differently?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in a lot of challenging spaces in a short career. I've worked at INAC. I was a cathedral tour guide. I have worked in the nonprofit sector. I've worked in Indigenous cultural safety programming. So I've always worked in spaces where there's a little bit of a sparring of the soul, and you learn over time to take care of yourself spiritually, because there is a lot of spiritual and emotional energy exerted, especially when I was younger, and I felt constantly like I was in spaces where my humanity or my presence was up for debate. But I think really the most unsafe or culturally unsafe experiences I've had within institutions was when I was a really young person, and before I was ever what I would think of now as a museum professional, before I was a journalist, before I was a curator. It was when I was working in an institution as a student, and working in a lot of very frontline, front of house tours, museum assisting, greeting the public. And there were a lot of, like, that was in some ways some of the best experiences I ever had. I had to get to have conversations with interesting people every single day, and also some of the most unsafe experiences I've ever had. And I think, like, when we think about safety and Indigenous people having good and safe experiences in institutions, we do think about historians, curators, conservators, but we're not always thinking about youth or students or elders who are volunteers or people who have to work front of house. Because if I was working in a gallery space and someone came in and they were expecting to see masks and totem poles and not be challenged or have their way of thinking challenged and they're feeling inflamed, the first person that they're going to come spar with is me. And if you're 20 and you have no recourse, you have no one that you have no training on how to get yourself out of a situation, that can be extremely taxing. And so I think something that can be done is, like, the public is wonderful. The public is why we have institutions. It's there for the public. But then also having folks who work in really front end positions, just being aware, like, people are going to want to come ask you questions. Here's what to do if you feel unsafe. Here's how you get yourself out of an unsafe situation. Here's who you can go talk to afterwards to sort of decompress from an experience if it's been negative. Because if I had had that recourse as a young person working, like, and just starting out exploring what it's going to be like to work in museums and galleries, I think that would have been a very positive experience for me at the time. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that insight from a youth perspective, because I think we do forget the burden that docents and guides carry as the frontline workers in museums. So thank you for that. Dana, I'm going to pose this question to you now. What's the worst experience or exhibition you've seen, and why?
Well, there's two things. One was an exhibition of, it was partially African art, and it was ceremonial regalia. And I couldn't handle it. I tried to. And then, I had to get out of the space sort of as fast as possible. But then, of course, trying to get out of the space, and I encountered, a whole bunch of course, Indigenous cultural belongings. And then, so I'm conflicted always about showing, I know there's been change in some museum practices, but not nearly enough still. I mean, it's ongoing, as we know, it's a process. And but it's when, knowing that those sacred belongings exist in all Canadian institutions, and how they exist. And so another time was actually in vaults. So I've been in a number of vaults, And also, that sometimes you actually, for me, felt, very sick. It made me feel ill, physically ill. And, I had to leave the vault, and I just had to go and get some air. But they're difficult sites when you're doing research as curators to go into, and when things are that are bound. And I think, is it the one term, incarcerated? Robinson uses that term, incarcerated. I remember when I heard that term, I thought, oh my God, he's so radical. Thinking what a radical term, and loved it, of course. But there's things that should no longer be there. And sometimes it might just be a little stick, might just be a stone. But there's things that, need to go home, and for communities to decide themselves what to do. And then, as we know, not everybody wants these things back. Sometimes they want to keep them there for research, scholarship, learning from. It's a complex process. But it's when you see not only Indigenous sacred belongings in gallery spaces, but also tribal, from different nations that are thrown in there as well. And it's haunting and can be quite disturbing. So the vaults, and then also sacred items.
Yes, thank you for that, Dana. That's a huge, complex discussion. I know it's ongoing, and that, yes, for sure. Thank you for your insights on that. Barry, I now turn to you.
Yeah, I'm going to, thanks, Dana. It was a good segue. For the past several years, I've been working a lot internationally with international institutions, and I too get an opportunity to see what is on exhibition or what's in the vault. And last year, while in Europe, touring a city museum on a private tour with a group of curators, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and artists, we were led into a room without warning and confronted with human remains. And for me, it was an extremely disturbing experience. And I had to turn my back immediately, and I had to leave the room of the space along with the other Indigenous artists. Both of us were really shocked and felt so uncomfortable. And as Dana mentioned, in Canada, but also in Europe, there are multitudes of objects from North American tribes that emanate very, very powerful energy. And I in this one institution, there was even a false face mask that was on public display. So there's really a clear lack of cultural knowledge and protocol regarding these objects and sacred works. As well, I noticed that there were numerous labels throughout these institutions with outdated nomenclature for tribal affiliations. Some of the objects had inaccurate or even speculative or sometimes just simply wrong information about what it was. Further, there's so many other international institutions out there that house massive amounts of Indigenous material culture from South America, Central, US, Canada, which really makes me uncomfortable in terms of knowing its provenance, mode of collection, and it makes me sad in terms of the obscurity from the people in the tribes from whom it once belonged. So, what could be done better? There needs to be increased opportunities for us to engage with these institutions, both domestically and internationally. And additional support needs to be accorded for Indigenous artists, curators, knowledge keepers, to work with these international institutions, museums, and galleries through partnerships and community-led dialogue with impacted Indigenous communities. Outreach and sharing of an institution's material culture, historical holdings, with international Indigenous communities. We need to know what's out there. I document like crazy when I go somewhere, all kinds of stuff, especially if it's Anishinaabe. I'll just go through and I'll photograph it all, just so that I can send it to people to make them aware. They need to open talks about repatriation, reparation of sacred and ceremonial objects, as defined by impacted communities. And then another thing that can also help these institutions is artist-led interventions with international institutions to either animate and give contemporary context to their historical collections, because they just languish there. So, you can interact with them from an Indigenous perspective if they're not sacred, for example, and you can heighten the awareness of the international domestic instruments that are out there regarding Indigenous peoples' issues in reparation. I did a couple collaborative projects working with institutions, staff, law students in particular, in Zurich and Geneva around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, to basically engage the community, make them aware of what's going on and what kind of relationships need to be improved. And I also did that domestically with the University of Windsor Faculty of Law and School of Creative Arts, where we did a collaborative work around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. So those are some of the things I think that could help and could be done better to help improve relationships with institutions, Indigenous artists and curators and knowledge keepers.
Thank you, Barry. That's a really thorough and beautiful answer. And in fact, you've kind of answered my last question, which is, what positive changes in museum practice have you observed over your career? And what are the most important things that museums need to do now to sustain these changes, these positive changes, and to continue to improve how Indigenous art is exhibited, talked about, and activated in the future? So, as you have largely answered that question, if you have anything to add to what I've just asked, please do so in a short time. And then I'll move on to the other panelists.
Yeah, there's four. I kind of came up with four opportunities to sustain change. There needs to be a meaningful institutional infrastructure, and just basically that means demonstrable Indigenous representation. It has a structured and meaningful mentorship program and continual learning for Indigenous curators, administrators, etc., and strong outreach to Indigenous local communities. Another opportunity is nurturing Indigenous excellence and positive representation. And I spoke a little bit about that, including Indigenous curators on all Indigenous exhibitions, opportunities for residencies with projects, etc. Another one would be the educational development and programming. That would be like, include Indigenous community representatives, scholars, curators, creatively use technology to make the information accessible outside of the institution itself, build a legacy, a strategy that provides universal access to what you're doing for outreach for future generations. And then the last would be often overlooked as an integrated library and archives expertise in exhibition development, looking at the institutional holdings in terms of archival holdings and how that can be further augmented to enhance the learning experience. So those are kind of things that I would add to improving and sustaining change within institutions. And one other thing, just really briefly, is there needs to be clarity in terms of what institutions mean when they're talking about decolonization. I mean, it's a term that's thrown out there a lot, and it's very, very unclear. But you need an internal strategy and you need an external strategy in terms of communication to and give meaning and substance to what you're talking about when you're talking about decolonization.
Well, I agree completely with everything you said, Barry. Thank you for those thoughts. They're very, very important. I'm going to ask the rest of the panel to augment these thoughts with their own experience of the changes, the positive changes we've seen, and how we can inscribe those into the future. Dana?
Well, I think one is a collaboration. I think a collaboration and also letting Indigenous people lead the dialogue, and also working with the communities of quote non-experts who generally are the experts, when it comes to their own, cultural belongings. And, I just think that's so important. And I know what's going on right now. Well, there's been a conversation that's been opened up with the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery, which I've worked with and worked with their historical collections as well. And But they've reached out to my home reserve, Wood Mountain, Lakota First Nations, to inquire about some of the things that they have, that, you know, I think that they know that maybe they shouldn't have them and what to do. They don't know. I mean, some people genuinely don't know what to do. Other people maybe want to keep it, you know, keep these things, right? But I think there's also a lot of, you know, people still need to be educated on what some of these belongings are and what they mean, and, you know, and why, you know, we don't want to have chanupas on, you know, out on display. And I know and that's my own point of view. So we're thinking about what the point of view of the curator, right? And, you know, I couldn't imagine ever putting a chanupa, which is a pipe, on display, unless it's James Luna's. But you know, those pipes that he made with the those ones, but the sculpture ones that he made. But, you know, but I know there have been a few exhibitions of chanupas, and, you know, but I think it's the ones where you don't know where you got them from. You don't know who held them. You don't know their purposes. Because then the trade pipes come into the equation. Well, that was made for trade. It was made for tourism. You know, we bought it at, you know, the trading post at, you know, but I think it's those ones where, you know, that are meant for ceremony, that you just don't put them on display. So it's that fine line of when it's ceremonial or when it has been made for the market, and then who decides that, because there's not clear, you know, there's not clear information on that either. So I think there's change, of course. I think people want to change, and thinking about decolonization, people just weren't educated. You know, weren't educated about Indigenous people. And, you know, as an educator myself, still see it, you know, every year with the new batch of students, that there's still a lack of education in regarding histories of their own, where, you know, territories that they come from, and that we live in a treaty nation, and even that we're in a state of reconciliation as a country. So endless work.
Wow, yes, yes.
Yeah.
You raised some really, really interesting and actually troubling questions, because of course, the collection of these items and their display is it's just loaded with problematics and dialogues that need to occur. So thank you for talking about that, Dana. Emily, I'm going to ask you the same question. Yeah.
Something that I've seen that I think is hopeful and beautiful is this slow realization of institutions that they are living entities full of breathing things. And I think when you think of like the museums of the past, it's about, they're the beacons of truth and everything is right and it's static and timelines are linear. Whereas now, I think the more self-awareness that institutions have, it's a slow like opening, a slow eye-opening, slow awakening. And sometimes there's this, I've been frustrated in recent times over feelings of backsliding for sure. But I think the more that we can be aware and think in like not just in linear trajectories, the way I think institutions of the past have, but thinking multidimensionally and thinking about not just our holdings and collecting practices, but also in terms of responsibilities, and thinking interdisciplinary, working directly with not only artists, but also communities. It makes me feel really excited for the future. And I hope that I have a long, exciting career ahead of me, where this work is going to continue to be done. But that would be it. And then I think in order to sustain this, if you had asked me this, like even maybe a year ago, I think I got asked a very similar question at a panel at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. It's just like, what do institutions need to do to be sustainable in the way that we think about and work with and activate Indigenous art? And I used to just say, like, you need to hire Indigenous staff. Like, if that was the be all end all, and we do need to hire Indigenous staff. You need to have Indigenous people leading the direction and the way that Indigenous art gets activated and learned from, and is in the way that we're in relation with it. But it has to be, everyone has to be all in. It has to be, the institution is all in on these conversations. And we need to create more and more sort of open auditoriums for these conversations we have, like spaces like this. The more conversations that we have, the more that we can unpack and unload difficult concepts, the better off we're going to be for the future. And
Absolutely.
overall, I feel very optimistic for the future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emily, for that.
I also feel, Bonnie, if I could just add that I think that institutions need to put resources behind making public the things they hold. And that's you know, putting things online or making things outward facing. These are there are no, I mean, there's very, very scant federal funds available for this kind of work. It tends to always sift to the bottom of the to-do pile in terms of institutional imperatives, because those imperatives are not often set by Indigenous people. And I think, I mean, you know, the first step is, what is in this institution that we're holding and who needs to know about it? And obviously this book was a way of doing that, but it's a book. It's not a website that's easy to access. You know, that's the next step. But we do, but we, you know, when it comes to the Cape Dorset original drawings that Emily's going to be working on over the next year and a half, you know, we have managed to get almost 90,000 original drawings from Cape Dorset up on this website that is available. That's a really unusual partnership between private donors and the federal government, and it took years and years and years to do. But just I'm just aware of how hard it is to actually access the objects, and presumably this all starts from people being able to know where things are. Like, I remember the painful feeling myself of going, I come from British Columbia, and I'm very you know, feel a great deep love and respect for Northwest Coast Indigenous art. And I went to Chicago, and the reason I was excited to go to Chicago, this is probably 25 years ago, was because the Field Museum, because I knew the Field Museum had this, you know, epic collection of objects from the Northwest Coast. And so I went to the front desk, and I was like all breathless and excited, and like, which way do I go? Like, where's the Northwest Coast Gallery? And they were like, what? We don't know about that. And then they had to phone upstairs, and that person had to phone upstairs, and that person had to phone upstairs. And finally it was like, oh, that's in, you know, J12. You know, they gave me this map with this little circle on it, and I went here and there and up and over and down and around and back. And finally I found this gallery that was completely dark until you walked into it, the lights clicked on, and the cases were just jammed with objects that had numbers on them. There was not any other information in the whole gallery. And it was the most obscene display. I mean, that was, in terms of worst experiences, like for me, that was
like
one of the most
cabinet of curiosities.
Not even, it was
some
specimens
of
or something.
this,
Not even a
I
sense
mean, some of the photography of these
adaptation.
objects even is controversial as well. And so, you know, I agree that collections should be documented properly, but there are some communities that do not want these objects photographed and do not want them presented. And so I think, you know, community consultation is so essential before any of this discussion occurs. Should they ever be on display?
Yes.
You know, what does it mean that they're on display? You know, all of those sorts of existential questions about what is the museum for, and who does it serve, need to be asked. And we're starting that, I think, but we're not even halfway through it, I think.
No.
But anyway, I'm aware of time, and I want to ask Lynn, and give Lynn actually the last word on this, about you know, what positive changes have you seen in your career, and how can they be sustained?
I'm so glad to see that there are so many Indigenous people and curators working in a lot more than 30 years ago. But I think a big thing is about making space, whether it be on your board, having First Nations artists on the board, or like it goes right down the institution, but it starts at the board level and right down to your educators and your docents. It's about making space, creating that space for First Nations people to come in, inviting them in. How many galleries, how many First Nations people do you know that visit art galleries or museums frequently? There's not a lot. And that was part of what I wanted when I was at the McMichael is I wanted First Nations people to come in. And even with my writing, when I wrote for my mother because she never understood what it was that I was doing. So if I could write for her to understand what I was doing, then I was writing for the general public to get them to come in. Yeah, it's all about making space.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Lynn. Those are incredibly important words. And I hope that curators and museum professionals around the country, if they're listening, will take note of that, because I agree with you. I think it's foundational work to bring our voices in and hear them. That brings our discussion to an end, but I know that there are a few questions from the audience. And so I'd like to turn this over now to Jen Withrow, who is going to field some of those questions for us. But before I do that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Lynn. And thank you, Dana, so much for your thoughtful responses today. Thank you, Sarah, for making space for this discussion and for sharing with us your own thoughts on these issues. The conversation is everything. So let's keep talking. Thank you.
Bonnie, we've had a few questions. We've had in the Q&A, we've had lots of expressions of appreciation and gratitude. That's very nice. But among those, there are a few questions, and more than one person asked for the details of the Robert Houle essay that has been mentioned a few times. And I think, if I'm right, it's the essay in Land Spirit Power,
yes,
called The Spiritual Legacy of the Ancient Ones.
That's right. That's right.
So
yeah.
that can be found in the catalog of Land Spirit Power, which was an exhibition in 1991 or 92.
Yeah, the catalog might be a little difficult to access right now. So I'm not sure. It's such an important piece of writing that it would be lovely if we could somehow get his permission to reprint it or something. I don't know. But yeah, it's in the catalog.
I had a comment and a question from a contributor to the book who is among our audience members, Michelle Siliboy. And she said, first of all, she said that the Field Museum has updated their display with the participation of Indigenous curators. And so I think her words were, the Field Museum has updated and now have an incredible exhibition, which was curated by Indigenous curators. So that's worth a visit, sounds like, for those going out Chicago way. She also had a question in the question section. As an artist heading to Vienna to view artifacts, has anyone here asked for their art to be returned? No, asked for art to be returned to their nation?
Yes, I can't speak to that particular institution, but I know the Museum of Ethnography in Geneva has been involved, and the North American Native Museum have been involved in repatriating cultural patrimony back to Menominee peoples and also even into Australia. So this particular institution is very open to meeting with Indigenous representatives, and perhaps it's because the United Nations is right there, within the city of Geneva. But there is a very good working relationship there. But there's so much material culture out there, and so many sacred objects. It's very, very very difficult. I remember I went to a repatriation conference in Vancouver years ago at UBC. And I remember these cultural workers standing up and talking about how difficult it was for them to actually go and return these items back to the communities. Like the museums would put all the femurs together, the skulls together, etc. And the communities had no ceremony, for example, for mass burial. The Hawaiians didn't have a land base, so they'd have to sneak out at night and bury their people within the cliffs, near the ocean. People came back ill because they didn't have the protocols of the ceremony to actually transport these objects that they were bringing home. So, you know, it's a very overwhelming task, and people don't recognize the personal risk that people take in terms of involving themselves within that repatriation. So if you are looking at getting involved in this, make sure that you do speak to somebody within your community, you know, somebody that has that knowledge of how to protect yourself when
Yes,
handling these objects.
yes. There's a wonderful video. It's available on the National Film Board website. It's called Totem, The Return of the Gipscolatz Pole. It was made by Gil Cardinal about 15 years ago at least. It relates the story of a nation in BC who undertook a negotiation with a museum in Oslo. Now, this happened a long time ago, 30 years ago in the 90s, but the story of their ordeal and the communication that had to take place is still resonant today. So it's called Totem, The Return of the Gipscolatz Pole, and it's on the National Film Board. And I really do think that anyone interested in issues around repatriation, particularly from European museums, could benefit by having a look at that video.
In the chat, someone in our audience found a web link to a digitized version of Robert Hoole's essay. And so I put the link to that. It's published through Concordia. So I put the link there for those who want to continue on this thought trajectory by reading that essay. You can access it through the link that I put in the chat. We're getting a bunch of questions right now, and some of them there are threads in common. One person asks, what happens to Indigenous artifacts that are unearthed? I think what the person means is about during development of like when things are excavated in land that's being developed, who ends up owning them, and what's the process of that? And I'm thinking about, Bonnie, what we went through with your project of From Water to Water.
Yes, we came in contact during the research for the project, and Jen, you were there that day, and Sarah also, when we were taken on a tour of a dig just south of the McMichael, in what is now conservation land, and part of the relics or the material that had been excavated back in the 90s. Were shown on a table. We saw them in the clay, not in the flesh, but they were there. And that moment of seeing those belongings turned the project 180 degrees and really brought us into touch with the Wendat people themselves. Now, the museum, when we asked them, could we borrow those pieces, referred us back to the nation involved, who are in Wendake in Quebec, saying, really, they have authority over those objects. If you want to borrow them, you have to get permission from that nation. But ironically, those objects were held in the museum here in Toronto, and the people in Wendake had never seen them, had never been in their presence. This is a hugely ironic situation to have emerged just from a very simple moment on the grounds of this conservation area in Toronto. Yeah. So who owns them? We don't know, who knows? We don't know. This is the whole repatriation discussion, I think, that needs to go on, like about ownership.
There are also a few questions here about, I think we must have some artists and cultural workers on in the audience, because there are who are wanting to take advantage of this fabulous panel convened, who are asking for advice for young artists or museum workers. What would be your advice to them as they are embarking on their careers?
Can I answer this one? Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I would say marinate in the, like, just get out and see art, marinate in it, enjoy it, find out what really speaks to you and what is it that makes you excited. And it can be personal. I think the days of having to be objective and not have our own personal connections and relationships and narratives involved in the way that we think about art and engage with art are they're long over. And I would say if you're just starting out, a good way to do it is by writing reviews. And a lot of publications will, you know, offer small honorariums to write reviews, and it's an excuse for you to get out and see a show. And it gives you a chance to start flexing your muscles, the creative muscles, about how you think about shows, how you interpret shows, and how you get to share those with a broader audience. And I always say that's just a really, really great place to start. And then also make friends. Find your. I wouldn't be able to do what I do without my network of humans in the arts community, the cultural community, and beyond. And we're just better together.
That brings to mind of Joan Cardinal Schubert's term, the art tribe, I think she would call it, and that just, you know, be circulate in the community in the realm of art, because that's your field that you want to work within, and it's and see shows, get to know artists, writers, curators, and to build your network, but to have that community. It's really about, because it's very much a community, the art world. It's also an art community.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because writers and artists love to talk about their craft.
And stay strong.
Stay strong.
Stay strong.
I think another thing, you know, if there are young people on this call, that I often find myself saying, you know, is just when it comes to writing is, you know, write the piece that only you can write. And the same thing would be true of make the art that only you can make, or curate the show that only you can curate. Like what you said, Emily, about the personal. I think this notion of sort of almost like a quasi-scientific objectivity, that this was the point of scholarship, was to like pull back from the thing. And I think what you're talking about is a new model of scholarship and storytelling and exhibition making, where you move forward and connect in a really visceral way with the thing and tell the story only you can tell. And I think that's the door that's opening now, that I think is, you know, going to create stories and exhibitions and bodies of work that will be, you know, ever more powerful. There's no one else's recipe is going to work for you, you know.
Yeah.
You have to.
I grew up. Oh, sorry, I cut you off. I've got a time delay, so I don't mean to keep jumping in. No, I'm just saying I grew up in an art making household. So I always used to say, like, I'm used to thinking about like art and stuff as it lives on the kitchen table, and it's like leaned up against walls, and it's like wrapped up. Like my dad's a sculptor, so like there were always things packed up and wrapped up in thrift store suitcases or coolers. And it's just like these things have lived this whole tactile life where we can touch them, and they have dinner with us. And then it's almost kind of strange stepping into a gallery space where it's just like, oh, you're quiet and behind a box of glass. How weird is this? So we're in it. Yeah. Any way you can connect to it personally, and whatever it stirs in you is an important narrative.
Well, maybe one last question I can answer, which is two people asked, has this talk been recorded? And the answer happily is yes, we have recorded this talk. So if you would like to direct someone you know to our YouTube channel, it should pop up there in the next couple of days. I'm so glad that this conversation will be available for posterity among the McMichael webinars that we've been busy doing over the last sort of 3 years or so. Anything else, Bonnie, before we perhaps close?
No, I would just give my heartfelt thanks to our 4 panelists today and to Sarah. Gee whiz, your thoughts are so important to us right now. We are in a tipping point, I believe. I mean, it can go either way, backward or forward. And I loved what Lynn said, be strong, be strong. So with that, I'll just say thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your questions, and hope we get to talk again someday soon.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
very much. Appreciate
Nice
it.
to be with you
Yeah.
all.
Thank you.
everyone.
See you. Thanks,
Bye.
Bonnie.